Hey everyone, this is Matt from howtogardendesign.com, back for step 4 in my landscape design basics series, which is my 6-step beginner guide. And today we're going to learn to pull inspiration from images to use in your garden. So let's have a look. Realistically, I'm talking about finding inspiration, finding ideas from everything around you, in particular images, which I think are the most plentiful and easiest to find, and just little things that we can pull from them and little tips and tricks I want to share with you on how we can actually use those images to find ideas that you can apply to your own designs. So when I talk about finding inspiration, it's something that is always happening. This isn't something where you go out, you do the 3 steps we've done previously, and then you find your ideas, and then you're good to go, and you create a design, and that's it. Right? This is something that continues on throughout the design process. So it's where maybe you've come up with a couple of designs that you quite like, but you've still got a couple of things you need to figure out. So therefore you go and you do some research and you find ideas that can help you answer questions. Or, as we looked at in the previous step, maybe you've got some problems that you need to address. And so you go out and you find ideas that address or are solutions to those particular problems. And then you incorporate those back into your design as well. So sometimes designs start from a hunch rather than, copying something else. So a good example for me is at uni, I created a design that was basically just a tall mountain on a site. That's all it was. It was supposed to be something that would encourage kids to want to climb it. It was a challenge. And this mountain was something I kept coming back to, this little hunch. I didn't get the idea from anywhere. It just kind of popped into my head one day as a challenge for children, and that kind of informed the rest of my design in that particular site. Whereas for you, it might be a hunch where you want to include particular plants or a particular material, or maybe there's a particular view through your yard or to a particular corner of your yard. Or maybe you want to choose a particular color palette and just work with that, right? It could be anything. And then that will help inform what ideas that you look for and what ideas you pull from as well. Sometimes it might be other inspiration. So it could be you found an existing garden that you absolutely love and adore and want to try and basically copy as much of that as you can, while still using addressing the problems that are in your particular site and the opportunities that your site offers that one maybe doesn't. So that's another thing to think about. Lastly, don't forget the real world. This is something most people don't even think about, but the real world tells you so much, right? It could be colors that you really like. It could be when you walk through a particular space, it makes you feel a certain way. It could be really nice. It could be maybe it's too exposed and open, or maybe it's too narrow and cold and dark, right? The real world gives you clues around you about kind of spaces you enjoy and the kind of spaces you don't. Same thing for materials. If you're pushing a pram, or if you're in a wheelchair, or whatever it may be, maybe you're old and elderly, there's certain materials that are easier to move around on than others. There's certain plants and things that are easier to maintain than others. The real world gives you all these clues that you can incorporate into your own design to make things as simple and easy for you as possible. Just one more thing on this. I have my own little kind of what I call idea generator cheat sheets that you can get if you sign up at howtogardendesign.com, learn more. You can sign up, you can get the cheat sheets, and every now and then I may send an email. I tend to forget. But anyway, these are a little bit more rudimentary, and they kind of go through step by step in a more formulaic way, but that could be something that's really useful for you. So they're cheat sheets, and each cheat sheet has an accompanying video where I just go through the process of how to actually fill in the cheat sheet and how you can use it. So if you want, that's something you can look at as well. So we've looked so far in this series at a couple of different spaces that I've designed. We've gone from developing a base plan for these little areas, doing site analysis of these areas, and then problems and opportunities in step 3. So this one, we're going to do the same thing where we look at inspiration for each of these little spaces that I'm looking at. So the first one is garden for wheelchair users. So let's have a look at some ideas. First one's pretty straightforward. I've just made a note here of where it was sourced from. I'm going to put a link in the description for each of these images. So this one's from asheville.nc.gov, the North Carolina website. So in this idea, it's raised beds. Pretty useful idea, because for those in a wheelchair, raising it from ground level up to kind of waist height I think is really useful. The other thing about this one, obviously they can move alongside the bed, so that's a lot easier than having to reach down to ground level. And secondly, it also, keeping the bed narrow is quite useful as well, because in this instance they're leaning to the side, basically is only as wide as their arm can go. You want to keep things fairly narrow so that they can easily reach into the bed and do whatever they need to do to interact with it. Same thing, you can actually go around the other side and do the same thing from the other side. So if you were creating beds for someone who has mobility issues and they're in a wheelchair, you'd probably want to consider having longer, narrower beds. So that's just a good example of something you can pull out to think about in your own design work. Another example is mobile bench garden beds. So this one's interesting for two reasons, I should say. One is there's space beneath the bench, which obviously allows the user to face the beds, which I think is a lot more comfortable because then they can interact with both hands rather than leaning side to side to actually interact with the bed. So I think that's really good. The only downside, I guess, is that it's a fairly shallow bed, so you can't fit a lot of soil and therefore certain plants you won't be able to fit. But by and large, I think this is a really good solution to allow people to interact more directly with those kind of things. The other thing is it's got wheels, right, which allow you to move the beds. So maybe you need to move them to particular parts of the yard at particular times of year to get sunlight, or you want to protect the plants from strong winds or rain or storms or whatever, so you can push them down. Might be a bit more challenging for the person in the wheelchair, but if they've got another family member who can help them move, that might be useful as well. So those first two examples, I think, are solutions to the problem of limited access and range for someone in a wheelchair. This example is completely different. Obviously, there's nothing about this that says to you this is for a person in a wheelchair. It's not supposed to. And this is one of the points that I want to raise is you can get ideas from anywhere. I mentioned the real world, but even images, you don't have to search for wheelchair-friendly designs to get ideas for what you can incorporate into a wheelchair-friendly garden. So this example for me is a little bit different in that, I really like it. I think it's pretty. You can see I've got the kind of this meadow effect of this beautiful grass and flowers and whatnot, with these upright vertical elements, just silver birches that just kind of appear above it. So I think it's a really beautiful space to look at. And they've also got a little access path through the middle here. But what I like about this in particular is one thing I talk about in a few different spaces is the idea of when you're creating a garden for a particular person who has particular needs, they don't have to access the whole garden. So in particular for the wheelchair user, in this instance I was thinking just attempting to maintain an entire garden can be a lot of work, and attempting to turn an entire garden into something that's functional for a wheelchair user is also a lot of work. So why not have spaces that are specifically for them, for particular activities, but other spaces that are more features, right? And in this instance for me a feature would be like a meadow kind of space like this, where you've got this beautiful kind of grass that just kind of sits there and grows up and is lovely to look at and interact with if you go along and you run your hands along it. But the intention isn't that they can go everywhere in this space. The idea is that it's just there as a visual thing they can look at. Maybe you have some tall upright elements as well if you want, like the birches. In terms of maintenance, maybe they have to call in family or friends a couple of times a year to help maintain it, just trim it or whatever they need to do. Or maybe you hire help to come in. Maybe you incorporate that as part of your gardening budget moving forward, is a maintenance cost to maintain something like this. The benefit of this is that I think it makes the garden more friendly for a lot more people. This isn't a lawn, right? We may be using it in a lawn-like area, but the idea fundamentally is that it's a feature. It's not a space you're supposed to be in, it's a space you're supposed to look at and enjoy in that aspect. So that's one example. And another one is this bamboo forest. Again, nothing about this screams wheelchair friendly. However, if you think about it, it's just a really cool thing to be in. Like you could have a little area that you can sit and relax, and you can enjoy the sun playing through the bamboo or the breeze as it passes through, rattling all the stalks. Another thing it does is it provides quite a bit of privacy, which if you remember in step 3, we talked about the fact that this particular site had some neighbouring oversight. So having a small bamboo area, maybe just like a little pocket that you could spend some time in, kind of does a number of things. One, it's an interesting space to be in. 2, you could fairly easily make a path through it. Obviously, you have to set up the beds in a particular way, but you could make a path through, have the wheelchair user go in, spend their time, sitting in a particular spot, and it provides some privacy from the neighbours next door. So, interesting little approach where instead of just putting a screen along the boundary, maybe the screen itself becomes the feature. In this case, the screen itself is the bamboo, and instead of just having a row of it, you have an entire forest. And I think that's where I was heading with that idea. Next one, another example that we looked at was the garden design for a hot climate. So again, interesting one here is succulents. Obvious approach for this kind of thing, an obvious solution to a lot of problems, I think, where you can see this kind of beautiful combination of different colors, shapes, textures, all those kind of things. So there's a whole world out there that a lot more people are a lot more knowledgeable about, but I think succulents obviously are a good solution to a very hot, dry climate. Different slightly is this kind of Mediterranean approach, or a Greek approach, I think, where you've got whitewashed bare walls, just bare concrete. This I think is just some sort of urn, but at first I thought it was a chair. Either way, doesn't really matter. And then you just got this olive, single feature tree in a courtyard, olive tree, and beautiful colours and shapes and texture with the really nice dark gloss green, and then kind of the lighter green and grey underneath the leaves as well. This for me is just really pretty because the way it's all just kind of a plain green background, it relies more now on light and shadow to play across the wall, as kind of a part of the space and a feature of the space as well. So nothing much here, just something interesting that I really like in a hot climate as well. Mediterranean approach, I guess. This one is more where I was thinking about, I actually stumbled across this and I thought that's an interesting way to do construction. So the idea is that it's actually rammed earth. You can see here it's from Rammed Earth Enterprises. So it has that concrete look where you can see the formwork that's been set up to support it. And I don't know exactly how they do it. I think they mix whatever their material is together like you would with concrete, and then it's just a pressure thing where they just constantly smash it all down so that it actually forms this rammed earth. So it gives you that kind of concrete aesthetic in terms of clean and sharp, but it's using, I think, a more friendly material in terms of the earth itself rather than concrete. And it's also a little bit of a different patina and colour to it. So I think it works really well in this Australian environment where you've got lots of browns and greys and greens and all those kind of things. So that might be an option in a hot climate where you can use rammed earth walls to provide some, shade, shelter, away from the breeze, that kind of thing. So I think that's where I was heading with that idea. And a final similar one is using upright poles for fencing. So in this case, it's less a visual break. Well, I suppose it's a visual break, but it's less about completely blocking something off. And one of the reasons this is interesting to me is that in hot climates, you want to try and take advantage of any little thing you can. So in this case, I was thinking of breezes, right? Where it might be a late afternoon and it's a really warm day, but now a breeze is coming through that's actually quite cool. If we had just a generic fence, be it a timber paling fence or even a rammed wall like we looked at before, you're not able to enjoy any of that breeze that comes through. But if you've got this kind of upright poles that are thin enough that they clearly operate as a fence, but they have these gaps that allow this breeze to pass through into a space. If you had an entertaining area that was behind here, you'd actually be able to enjoy all that breeze that comes through. Now, this isn't a perfect solution, but I think it's an interesting option where we think about the idea of, allowing those breezes through, and it also makes the space somewhat more interesting. So I think that's just, again, another idea that I stumbled across when, that might be a solution to allow these breezes to come through. Lastly, we've got our garden down the side of a house, which is my parents' property. I just really like this image, honestly. I think I found it on Pinterest, and it's just a riot of different colours. You've got this beautiful dark maroon kind of at the back there. It's echoed in this kind of black-clad wall that's got this ivy growing on the sides of it. You've got this gold kind of colour as well, and you've got these beautiful different shades of green. And you've got this crazy kind of flagstone paving as well with, again, more green in the middle. It's just a really beautiful looking space. And it's also narrow down the side of a property, so I think it's a really fascinating way to kind of liven up what is for most people a utility space. This one here, I think, from memory, I was thinking about benches down the side of the property. So one thing I didn't talk about in step 3 was the idea of including some sort of benches to enjoy capturing afternoon or morning sun in particular. So I didn't really make a note of those. I think we will in some of the design steps that I look at next. But this is just looking at, all right, well, if you ignore this entertaining area on the side, maybe you've got just a retaining wall that's kind of built up with just generic, small feature trees and some little plantings, soft plantings behind it. And you got this nice bench. And maybe that's just a nice spot where, I don't know, during summer, you kind of go down the side of the property. This sounds a bit weird, but stick with me. You go down the side of the house, you've got your book, you've got a drink, and you're just sitting there enjoying some afternoon sun in a fairly sheltered, somewhat shady area on a nice little bench. So that's really where that thought came from. This one I really love. Again, I was thinking about the side of the house. It's similar to the meadow idea we had previously, where this is by Clyde Oak, by the way, who I believe is a designer, and I got this from a Medium article that I've also linked below, as I said. But really simple use of materials. You've got this beautiful, looks like fountain grass that is just semi-mass planted and just provides this beautiful kind of row of, again, something you want to reach out and interact with and touch. But again, it's more of a feature. You're not supposed to be in the space. You're kind of next to it, looking out at it. And then these little kind of, I think like peppercorn trees, I actually don't know what these are, feature trees that are just planted, and again they kind of these vertical elements that rise out of this little grassy area, so similar to the one we looked at for the wheelchair, but again this is looking down the side of a property. And I think you'll see as we go into the design steps, basically taking this similar idea and applying it to that space and seeing what it would look like. Last but not least, this I came across, and this was actually more addressing a problem. So you may remember for that particular side of the property, we've got utility areas. So we've got a hot water heater, we've got a heating unit, and an electrical box as well. So it was going, if I'm looking down that space from, the end of the property and looking down in this direction, how can I provide some coverage? It's a fairly narrow space, and the solution in this instance, which I think works really well, is just screens, right? They've put up some screens basically to either partition different areas, or in our case we could use it to block off certain things from view, whether you want to do it just from one direction or from both directions looking down, or even screen all the way around the unit. Again, you have to be careful of how you do that because you want to make sure you maintain access and can still function. But more or less this was just an idea. The other thing I like about it is it adds a little bit more depth. So you've kind of got this zigzaggy motion with your eyes, and it almost draws you in. You go, oh, I actually want to go down and explore what's in here. I'm guessing it's probably just a clothesline or something. Or I want to go and explore a little bit further what's along. So it adds that layers of depth to a space that often vertical elements bring, I think, which is really, really nice. So look, this was just exploring some of the ideas that I found, and I hope, in terms of lessons, pull ideas from everywhere. And I think when it comes to searching for ideas, I think you've seen in a couple of these, like sometimes it's just something cool that I like and I want to try and incorporate into a design. Or if I'm trying to find or design something quite specific, like the wheelchair idea, I'm not just looking for wheelchair ideas, so to speak. They're often solutions to help you handle that kind of issue, but you can incorporate ideas from anywhere. And I think this last image in particular is quite useful because it is a solution to a proposed problem, such as hiding those units, but I want to try and incorporate it into a broader design. So that's what we're going to look at next. Step 5 is all about actually getting started on our first design. So I will see you then.